Hello, welcome to this session on professional formats and professional structures. But first a question. Why should you learn these professional formats? Wouldn't it be easier for you and quicker for you to do assignments without learning these formats? And then maybe after you graduate and you are employed, you can learn the formats quickly and easily on the job. Maybe you won't even need them on the job. For some students, that is their default position. That's their habit. They will do an assignment without the formats in a course. Their goal is to pass the course with a minimum effort. Sometimes these assignments don't even have paragraphs. They're just one long random piece of writing without visible structure. Other students, and I hope I'm talking about you, come into a course with a sense of organization and structure. And their sense of organization and structure is good, but maybe it could be better. Some of these students learn better organization and structure in a course. Again, I hope that's you. Other students, which is not you, are satisfied with their default position and they don't want to spend the time and energy to improve themselves. They feel they are good enough as it is. That's fine for them. So how much you learn about structure and organization in a course like this depends on how much you want to learn and how much of an effort you want to make. The structures and formats of organization in this course, in the course text, will make you more effective, make you more efficient, make you more focused, make you more productive, and make better use of your time. And isn't that worth doing? Isn't that what you want? Learning something new is an investment in time and energy, and so are you ready to make that investment in your education? Let me start by defining what I mean by structures. By structures, I mean intellectual structures, which are tools to organize and plan a report, tools to research a report, tools to organize a report in writing. These intellectual structures are tools to organize content. They're not the content itself. Think of the analogy of a goldfish bowl with water and goldfish in it. The goldfish bowl is like the form or structure that holds the content. The content is the water and the fish. Or think of the example of a calendar. A calendar is a mental tool or a mental structure that can be used to plan, organize, and schedule tasks in a temporal sequence. Or think of the example of instructions to assemble a piece of furniture. You need the right tools, you need the right screws and fasteners, and you need the right parts. And you might say to yourself, well, I can assemble this piece of furniture faster if I don't take the time to read the instructions, or I don't take the time to gather the right tools, or I don't take the time to gather the pieces and put them all in order. You could say that to yourself. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, a piece of furniture can be unbalanced and wobbly, or the furniture could just be weak and fall apart. And at that point, maybe you have to take the furniture apart. You have to start all over again, in which case you've lost time and feel frustrated because you were trying to do things quickly without planning. Now, think of a calendar as an intellectual tool to organize your time. You could simply, forget the calendar, make a list of what you want to do in any order without scheduling what you want to do, without organizing the items into sequence. That's how some students do assignments. I know that's not how you do assignments. These other students, they try to do everything at the same time in what seems like the quickest and easiest way. That is like trying to assemble a piece of furniture without using the instructions. If you just follow the list without a sequence, the result could be chaotic. If you use a calendar to organize the list in a sequence, you are more organized and have a better chance for success. It takes more time to organize yourself with a calendar. It takes more time to plan. But the time spent doing that in the end can make you more effective and save time. Mental structures and formats allow us to organize tasks by separating tasks into stages, into a sequence, to focus on each stage one by one in sequence so that each stage gets more attention for more efficiency. We can use these mental structures to prepare information for a report, and we can use other mental structures to organize a report so that it's easy to understand. Different uses, different types of structures. So we have some intellectual structures that are procedures or methodology that help with an analysis. We have intellectual structures that help make decisions, and we have intellectual structures that help communication. Different disciplines have different forms of communication and different forms of structure. But if we look at carefully, we'll see similarities in all of them. One place I can think of a form where we don't show similarities that is between the form of a novel. The form of a novel is different from the form of an essay. The form of a novel is usually organized in a plot, usually a plot that tries to imitate real life. An essay is organized in terms of rational arguments, although life does not happen like an essay. In doing assignments in this course, you are learning to use these mental structures and formats. So let me give you a very general structure for preparing a professional report in sequence. First, begin with the research problem. Second, formulate a working hypothesis that would solve the research problem. Third, formulate the questions that need to be answered to find a solution to the research problem. Fourth, identify the data and human sources relevant to answering the questions of the research problem. Fifth, collect the data. Sixth, interview the human sources, which are typically experts. Seventh, analyze the data and information from sources. 8. Determine if the data and information from sources confirm the working hypothesis or whether the working hypothesis needs to be changed. 9. If the working hypothesis needs to be changed, more data and information may also need to be collected and more analysis done. 10th, turn the working hypothesis into a conclusion and a thesis statement. 11th, begin the report with the conclusion and the thesis statement. 12th, organize the report in sequence of what helps the audience understand best. So there I've given you a structure to get to the stage of writing the report. And I'm also going to give you structures, professional structures that go past that and now that we have the data and the evidence and the analysis, and we're ready to dig into the draft, these structures will be for drafting and revising the structure of the final report. The example that I've just given you of a general structure as a sequence, you see that it separates the stages to allow a sharper focus at each stage, more clarity, and allows time to be budgeted. Now, sometimes if you're doing a professional report, you might have a fairly long period of time. Maybe you've got 3 months, maybe you've got 6 months, maybe you have a year. That's more time, but likely you have to work on a longer, more complex report. On the other hand, as a professional, you might be given a very tight deadline. And even a professional on a tight deadline will tend to use a structure to be more efficient. Now, I talked about, as part of this, a working hypothesis. I want to spend a little time talking about the working hypothesis and how it fits in. With a working hypothesis, there's a problem that the working hypothesis could be too general, and there's a problem that the working hypothesis can be too specific. So let me start with a hypothesis that is too general. Let's say that you have no working hypothesis. You only collect data and interview human sources. So let's imagine you are a police officer investigating a murder in a city of 1 million people. You have no working hypothesis, so you have 1 million suspects. That's a lot of suspects to interview. The investigation will take a long time and use a lot of resources. That's not how the police do investigations. Based on experience in past crimes, the police form a working hypothesis. Unless a murder is random, and very few murders are random, the murder was probably committed by someone who knew the victim and had some kind of connection to the victim. That hypothesis reduces the number of suspects drastically from 1 million down to a few, and it makes the investigation quicker and more efficient. Now, an exception would be if the victim was random. So a serial killer may kill people the killer does not know, but chances are the victims fit certain circumstances, such as being in a certain place at a certain time, alone and vulnerable. The police collect evidence, and in that evidence they see a pattern to construct a working hypothesis on this criminal. Or give another example. A doctor has a patient who is 50 years old, overweight, and smokes. Statistically, a person who fits this kind of profile might be more susceptible to certain types of ailments. So the doctor knows this and is alert to certain probabilities and is starting to construct a smaller, more narrow focused working hypothesis. Having a working hypothesis makes the collection of evidence faster and more focused. If the data contradicts the working hypothesis, then the working hypothesis needs to be changed. Now, I was given an example I started with an example of a working hypothesis too general. What about a working hypothesis that's too specific? That can create blind spots. And if the working hypothesis is wrong, that can also create blind spots. So for example, it's taking this hypothetical murder investigation. The working hypothesis might be that someone was murdered in his or her home in a robbery. The evidence on the scene is the windows are broken from the outside and expensive items are missing and stolen. On the basis of that evidence, the police might form a hypothesis to guide the investigation. But what if the person who committed the crime planted the evidence so that the police would form the wrong hypothesis, do the wrong investigation, and not suspect the real criminal? So with a working hypothesis, you don't want to jump to conclusions. You want to see if the evidence or data supports the working hypothesis or contradicts the working hypothesis. You don't want to force the evidence to fit the conclusion when it doesn't fit the conclusion. In criminal investigation, a standard working hypothesis is sometimes called profiling. That means that certain circumstances are more probably indicate a guilty person, and sometimes these are statistical. For example, the statistics show that violent crimes are much more frequently committed by men than women. So that right away, that is a likely aspect of a working hypothesis in a violent crime. Or statistics might show that somebody driving a red sports car is more likely to drive faster than the speed limit, so you would watch for a red sports car. And actually, that example comes to me from a conversation with a police officer who was on the traffic detail. Doctors do the same kind of profiling, and I've just talked about an example of that. But these working hypotheses, some particularly racial profiling, they can lead to terrible abuses. So, in an investigation, and an investigation is a type of analysis of evidence, as the evidence is collected, the investigator keeps going back to the working hypothesis and tests the evidence as it evolves against the working hypothesis. The investigator keeps alert to contradictions that indicate the working hypothesis is wrong and needs to be adjusted. The investigator might even take the initiative to look for contradictions or to propose contradictions just to test the working hypothesis, which is exactly one tactic that the textbook in this course suggests in preparing a professional report. The textbook says, look for contradictions to your own working hypothesis. Propose contradictions to your own hypothesis. Be careful of your assumptions and look for contradictions. Now, in a police investigation, if there is political or social pressure, the process may jump to conclusions because results are needed quickly. And sometimes, unfortunately, people are convicted and sent to prison for crimes they didn't commit because the evidence seemed to fit the evidence seemed to fit the hypothesis, and the jury could be convinced that the evidence fits the hypothesis. Sometimes people believe conspiracy theories because the data seems to fit the hypothesis. So, a working hypothesis is an intellectual tool that helps the process, but the evidence really needs to confirm the hypothesis, and if the evidence doesn't fit the hypothesis, then you change the hypothesis. So what happens if you don't follow these structures? Let's say you start an assignment within 3 days of the deadline. In doing that, you are creating pressure on yourself to produce fast results and pressuring yourself not to organize what you're doing. It's like saying, I have to put this piece of furniture together quickly, so I will ignore the instructions. With little time left, you do everything at once. You don't have enough time. So you skip stages and you leave gaps and you do things at the same time. You are writing a draft while you're still collecting the data, and you don't have enough time left to collect all the data. You are analyzing the data as quickly as you can, and the data, while the data is not complete yet. You write the conclusion before you can prove the conclusion. And then with a quick analysis based on incomplete data with gaps in information, you force the data and the analysis to fit a conclusion that you want to be true. You try and force information to fit when it does not fit. You may not even be sure of what the conclusion is. You might just guess what a good conclusion might be, or you might guess what conclusion you think the instructor wants. You don't realize that the instructor is actually marking how you support the conclusions with good evidence. So this kind of last-minute assignment looks chaotic. The conclusion doesn't answer the research problem. The data doesn't fit the conclusion. The data does not support the analysis. The analysis does not prove the conclusion. The terms don't fit. The report is disconnected with repetition and gaps, and the report doesn't fit together. The result is it's hard for the reader to find the conclusion, and sometimes the conclusion is even missing. And the process causes you a lot of stress. These are problems of structure and organization and of time management. You know you're smart, but your habits are disorganized. It seems to you that your marks don't reflect how smart you are, and the problem there is organization. Believe me, I'm an instructor. I have years of experience. If you mark 600 assignments a term, as I did last term, you can see the problem, the patterns, quite clearly. You can tell by the first few sentences how good the assignment is likely to be. Now, imagine you are employed to write a professional report. For example, you are employed, let's say, to write a report advising a company whether or not virtual tourism is commercially viable for the company. And that's actually one option for an assignment in this course. But imagine that you're employed. So this is now more than just marks at stake. The profitability of the company is at stake. Your career is at stake. If you advise that virtual tourism is profitable and it isn't profitable, the company can lose money and blame you. If you advise that virtual tourism is not profitable and it is profitable, the company can miss a good opportunity, lose money, and blame you. If you choose that assignment option, which opinion will you offer, and how will you prove that your opinion is true? Now, you could think of that as a binary question. That is, it has a yes or no answer. Yes, it will be profitable. No, it won't be profitable. And you could make a decision by flipping a coin. Heads for tails. Heads Heads for yes, tails for no. But do you want to risk the money of the company and your career on the flip of a coin? Being focused and organized can actually accomplish a task in less time. Being organized makes you effective. Your employer is paying you to be efficient and focused. Your employer is not paying you to waste the time for what you're paid. Your employer is not paying you to produce incomplete reports. Your employer is not paying you to make guesses. So the point is, the disorganization in a report is evident in its final structure. A well-organized, effective effort is evident in its final structure. A disorganized process can lead to a disorganized final report. A disorganized mind produces a disorganized report. An organized process can lead to an organized final report. An organized mind produces an organized report. I had a student one time who was very smart and worked very hard, but she couldn't discipline herself to focus. She started an assignment weeks before the deadline, but the more information she collected, the more information she wanted to collect. She became obsessed with collecting information more than she needed. The result was that her assignments were unfinished and disorganized and didn't really reflect how smart she was. After a couple of assignments, I saw the pattern. That was her default position, her habit. She produced more information than she needed for the assignment and took so much time gathering excessive information that she had little time left to organize the material and write it up. I gave her feedback on that. By the end of the course, she hadn't changed. The feedback I gave her had no effect. The next time she took a course with me, I saw the pattern again in her first assignment. Her default position, and I would suspect that it was the same in her other courses. Her habits were undermining her intelligence, and she couldn't change her habits. It was an issue of structure and organization. This course gives you structures and organization to follow to be effective. And I'm going to give you, as we progress, more detailed information on the structures. And we're going to look at different types of structures, such as organizing the process of doing a professional report, structures in the process of reasoning and analyzing, structures in communication. The textbook has a lot to say about structures in reasoning in individual chapters. It's a really good book, and you can get a lot. You can get a lot out of it. But I'm going to leave some of these more specific details in the individual chapters till we get to the chapters. Let me spend a little time now on making a couple more distinctions. As the text says, formats are also a way of communicating. You might feel that using a standard format that everybody else uses lacks energy and creativity. You might feel that using a standard format makes your work look standard and routine. But the text explains that the format itself is a way of communicating. The text explains that each professional discipline has its preferred standard format for a report. In general, the formats are very similar, although there may be specific differences from discipline to discipline. But once you know the standard format, you know where to find things, and the reader knows where to find things, And you and the reader know when a report is complete and professional, and you and the reader know when a report is incomplete and unprofessional from the format. So think of the format like a list of offices at the entrance of an office building. If you don't know the floor and the office number you are looking for, you know that there will be a list on the ground floor at the entranceway. Now, imagine an office building where the list is on a random floor. Let's say the list of offices is on the 5th floor, but you don't know that. You have to go looking for it. And when you find the list is random, not in terms of the number of the floor and the number of the office. So you have to go through the whole list, whole disorganized list, and read the whole list to find out what you're looking for. That format is original, but it's highly disorganized. It's highly dysfunctional. Or take professional reports. Most professional reports follow a standard format that begins with an introduction that has a thesis statement. The name for a thesis statement varies from discipline to discipline. The term thesis statement is academic, so it's used for academic writing. In business writing, the thesis statement is called the executive summary. In science, the thesis statement is called the abstract. In philosophy, the thesis statement is called the claim statement. In journalism, the thesis statement is called the summary lead. It's the same basic standard format appearing in the same place, just given different names in different professional disciplines. Now, there are some differences in form between different types of writing. So let me take some extreme differences. A difference between popular writing and a novel, and an essay or professional writing. Now there is a difference in structure. For example, a detective novel about a murder usually does not begin with a thesis statement explaining who committed the murder and what evidence proves who committed the murder. That would spoil the novel. A detective novel is a game of wits between the reader and the detective in the novel, as the reader tries to figure out the solution before the detective, and the reader usually fails. There's not much incentive to read a detective novel if the reader figures out the solution 100 pages before the detective. And there's not much incentive if the first page of the novel has a thesis statement solving the crime. The more cleverly and honestly that the reader is defeated in a detective novel, in the game of wits, the more exciting the experience. But that form is different from professional reporting. It's different from an essay. If you are reading a business report about a problem in tourism, you don't want it to be the answer to be a mystery. You don't want to be confused about the solution until the last page. A business report is not a detective novel. An essay and professional writing is not a detective novel. Structures are different. The purposes are different. We're going to get more specifically to the introduction and thesis statement in Chapter 4, but let me say some introductory comments to finish up this session. Some introductory comments about a thesis statement. Basically, structurally, a professional report begins and ends with a thesis statement. First of all, the thesis statement answers definitively the research problem. It can be as simple as yes or no, or it can be qualified and with more detail. But the answer is there in the research problem in the thesis statement. think of it as a yes or no statement. For example, is there a specific business gap in a specific market? Yes or no? Or can a certain idea be profitable? Yes or no? A proper professional report does not begin simply by repeating the search problem without an answer. That's not a proper thesis statement. The thesis statement gives the reader an understanding of what the report will prove and how it will be proved. Without the thesis statement, the reader doesn't understand the point of the information. So that's as far as I'm going to go in this session, and I'm going to pick this up in the next session. Stay tuned.